What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, it's Friday. You know what time it is. We're going over the wide receiver starts and sits as we head into week 8. We're going to talk a bit about each wide receiver's floor, their ceiling, and overall let you know where we have them ranked. So as you're heading into the weekend, you should have a good understanding of which players you're starting and which ones you're leaving on the bench. Keep in mind though, guys, this is not a full rankings video. We will not be comparing like players in a similar range. So if you do in fact have two players you're not sure who to start, the best course of action, go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. There you can access our rankings, all the waiver wire information, trade targets, sports betting picks, DFS picks, and more. So if that interests you, once again, go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link as always in the description box below. Before we do jump into the matchups though, let's go over the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was there are only two NFL teams where opponents are rushing on over 50% of their plays. The first team, of course, that's the Dallas Cowboys. Our question was which team was second. The correct answer was actually the New England Patriots. Congratulations to Connor McLeod. You got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, which quarterback currently ranks dead last in expected completion percentage? If you know who that player is, leave it in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. With that out of the way, guys, we're gonna hop right into the video. And the first matchup we have is the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Baltimore Ravens. Definitely the potential for a lot of fireworks. Unfortunately though, the most likely outcome is a low scoring affair. The over-under is set at 46.5 points. That's actually pretty low, especially when we're considering we're talking about Lamar Jackson, we're talking about Ben Roethlisberger, but in this game, Baltimore, they are expected to be road underdogs. They're only underdogs by about 4 points though, so this isn't a clear indicator of a positive passing game script, and unfortunately for the receivers on Pittsburgh, it's a really difficult matchup. We have 3 receivers, possibly 4 receivers in the pecking order that are talented enough to produce if their number's called, and because each receiver is so talented, it makes each one of them difficult to trust. The best way at looking at each one of these receivers though is to know that they're a talented wide receiver 2/wide receiver 3. Chase Claypool, obviously with the highest ceiling. I would then put Deontay right behind him. Juju as a third. Deontay Johnson, we could start him as a back end wide receiver 2. Claypool and Juju still ranked inside the top 30. They're going to be more in that wide receiver 3 range, but definitely players you should rely on. But obviously each one of them has been giving us their duds. On the other side, for Baltimore, of course, we have Marquise Brown, the only receiver in this offense outside of Mark Andrews we would ever consider starting. On the season, he's been largely a disappointment. While his volume it has been pretty consistent, he's only had a game with 5+ receptions in 3 contests so far. 2 of those 3 games occurred in both week 1 and week 2. His sole 100+ yard game, that also came in week 1, and now he just has 1 touchdown on the season. Despite all of those factors, we still believe in Marquise Brown. His talent, it's phenomenal. Unfortunately though, calling this game for a potential bounce back, it's in the range of less likely as opposed to more likely, but when you balance in his ceiling, cross that against his floor, you get a player safely in the top 30, and despite the projected total on this game overall being low, maybe leading to less volume, just know he's obviously going to be hit or miss. The next matchup we have New York Jets versus Kansas City. The New York Jets heading into this matchup are nearly 20-point underdogs. It's extremely rare for us to ever see these types of spreads. While we typically look for large deficits to indicate a pass-heavy game script late in games, or maybe a run-heavy game script for that leading team, whenever a team is just going to be completely dominated, you really can't guarantee any type of time of possession. The New York Jets are also without 2 of one of their best receivers. Jamison Crowder, the clear leader this year. While he has still yet to be ruled out, we're really just not expecting him to play. This would be a pretty solid spot if Brashad Perriman was healthy, the only other potential starting asset on this team, but he's not. He's injured. He's no lock to play either, which means no Jets receiver should you be considering putting in. On the Kansas City side though, it's a very very simple this week. Sammy Watkins, while he's still out, obviously you're not starting an injured player, especially a player like Watkins, who even if he is a late addition to the active roster, starting him in a game with a very low total in a blowout where Le'Veon Bell has the potential to have some sort of revenge game against the Jets, it's just a bet I'm not wanting to take, and most of you out there, I'm sure you don't have to take it. So circling back, Tyreek Hill, we have him as a top 3 wide receiver this week. No other Kansas City receiver though we can really suggest you starting. The next game we have Cincinnati Bengals versus the Tennessee Titans. I'm really excited to see how these two teams match up. We have Joe Burrow, who has an insane amount of passing volume, currently ranking 2nd in the entire league. In the area of pass attempts, he's going to be delivering the ball to 3 receivers that you should consider starting. We have AJ Green, we have ranked the lowest. Obviously, his floor is a bit lower than the other two, that being Boyd and Higgins, but we've seen improvement from him. His catch percentage is increasing. The way in which he's getting his opportunities is also expanding. So for him, although he's outside of the top 30, we could definitely see him as a viable flex play. As for Boyd and Higgins, we value them very similarly this week. The total, it's coming in at about 53 points. So while we do value the safety of Boyd when it comes to a volume perspective, each one of these receivers has a major chance to pop off. Both Boyd and Higgins we have ranked as back-end wide receiver 2s, but there's no denying wide receiver 1 upside. It's in their range of outcomes. On the other side of the ball, we have AJ Brown, Corey Davis. Obviously, no one's really feeling confident starting Corey Davis, and while me personally, I really believe you can start him and feel fairly safe doing it, I understand nobody's really buying in. We currently have him ranked inside the top 36, which means he's literally a starting asset for us based on rankings. Real star of the show, the guy with the most upside this week, none other, it's AJ Brown. Believe it or not, we have AJ Brown ranked inside the top 5. Obviously, start him with confidence, but let's head into the next matchup. The next matchup we have LA Rams versus the Miami Dolphins. Not an overall exciting matchup from a fireworks perspective, but it's still a matchup all of us should try to watch. We have the emergence of Tua. He's playing a very difficult defense, so if he can succeed, they have a lot to be really excited about. As for the receivers on Miami though, I really don't think this could ever be considered an upgrade. Wide receiver volume on its own likely to go down, so Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, you weren't starting it all anyways, but Devontae Parker, he's a player I'm trying to leave on the bench. While even though his range of outcomes do have a wide receiver 1 performance in it, if Tua comes and just shocks the world, the most likely outcome is a very poor performance, a extremely low floor, and we can't forget Parker still hasn't fully recovered from his injuries. The only other receiver we're talking about, obviously Preston Williams. The target splits could definitely look much different than they did with Ryan Fitzpatrick, which while unlikely to benefit Preston Williams, is still ultimately a possibility for this team. On the other side, we have Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp. You already know the usual suspects. These are the safe wide receiver 2s in matchups where there's a bit less upside, presumably less passing volume. It's going to impact each of these players' ceilings, their floors, in this matchup against Miami with a 46 total, while also being 4-point road underdogs. Doesn't bode well for that passing production. Jared Goff still not looking all that great. Each of these receivers, they should be considered volatile. However, we've been saying that all season, and yet these two have been very consistent producers. The next matchup we have Indianapolis Colts versus the Detroit Lions. This really isn't a game that anybody with a wide receiver in should be excited about. The only bona fide wide receiver 1 on this season on either of these teams is Kenny Golladay. While we do in fact have him still ranked inside the top 10 in a very poor matchup against a tough defense in the Colts, he's really the only one we can suggest with confidence that you should make sure to put in. We have Marvin Jones, also T.Y. Hilton. These are both players with a surprisingly similar skill set that on the season have actually both been disappointing their owners. Betting on either of these players, it's an endeavor that's more than likely going to fail. So if you actually do hit, you gotta chop it up to luck, but a little bit of luck may be exactly what some of your teams need out there. The next matchup we have is the Minnesota Vikings versus the Green Green Bay Packers. Very simple, of course, on the Green Bay side. We're starting Devontae Adams. We're not starting anyone else. And it's pretty simple on Minnesota as well. Jefferson, he can be trusted at this point. Adam Thielen, obviously a trusted wide receiver. If we're trying to accurately set your expectations for this game, the Minnesota Vikings are nearly an entire touchdown underdogs to the Packers, which bodes very well for the passing volume for both Jefferson and Adam Thielen. Whenever the volume increases and the projected total is over 53 points like it is, both Jefferson and Adam Thielen, we're expecting to have very solid performances. Jefferson, we have ranked just inside the top 20. Adam Thielen, bona fide wide receiver 1, inside the top 10 this week. So if you own either player, do whatever you can to get them in. The next matchup we have is the New England Patriots versus the Buffalo Bills. This game actually has one of the lowest projected point totals that I have seen in recent years, coming in at a whopping 41 points. Clearly, this is not good for any weapon in either offense. I think you should definitely downgrade Stephon Diggs, who has been really nothing short of fantastic. In a game though, with much of the production coming on the ground, the clock ticking off with every given play, the overall opportunities every player in this game will receive is likely to be lower than their season averages, with Julian Edelman already being ruled out, leaving N'Keal Harry as the only potential suitor to be someone you trust this week on the Patriots side. As much as I really want to love it, I would not suggest even my worst enemy to make that move. As for Stephon Diggs, he has fallen out of that wide receiver 1 ranking that we typically have him in. He is going to be a high-end wide receiver 2, but he's so close. We can't say that we wouldn't see it coming if he does have a big game. Potentially, Josh Allen just runs the offense through him. So the upside, it is there, but the floor is going to be quite a bit lower than it has been in most of the games leading up to week 8. The next game we have, it's a simple one. It's the Las Vegas Raiders versus the Cleveland Browns. This has a pretty high total coming in at 52.5 points. The Cleveland Browns will come into this as home favorites, but despite that, we still think there are fair starts when it comes to Jarvis Landry, also potentially Higgins. Jarvis Landry, we actually have ranked as basically a back-end wide receiver 2, top 30 play, and Rashard Higgins, he did enough to prove to us that if the volume goes his way and in a matchup where we suspect it will, we have him ranked inside the top 36 as well. On the other side of the ball, I understand Nelson Aguilar has been a player a lot of people added off the waiver wire. He's looked to be the most consistent receiver from a health perspective and surprisingly a hands perspective, but if we're trusting one receiver in the flex this week, we have to go with the talent of Ruggs. This game has a very high projected total. Raiders are expected to be playing from behind as well, so when it comes to Ruggs, if the potential workload for a player like Ruggs could be increased this week, his upside, his safety, and his floor as well, they should increase along with it. The next matchup we have is the LA Chargers versus the Denver Broncos. This game, it really doesn't have a ton of high-end receiving talent. Of course, we have Keenan Allen of the Chargers, who, if you ask us, we feel confident in his ability as long as Justin Herbert is at the helm. I believe the biggest question, of course, coming out of this offense from a start-sit perspective is going to be, can I trust Mike Williams? And while no, I can't say that it's a completely safe start, he's always a risk to be knocked out of the game due to injury, we still have him ranked just outside the top 30, which means we still believe Mike Williams, with the risk of re-injury, is still a player you should be starting in your flex. Moving over to the Denver Broncos side of things, we have Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy is a player we have very similarly ranked to Mike Williams, but even though they are ranked very similarly, their play style, our expectations on each player, they're going to be vastly different. When it comes to Mike Williams, we know he has multi-TD upside. He's been not only a red zone threat, he's been a deep ball threat, and when we're comparing, Justin Herbert instantly boosts the upside of that of Mike Williams. Even if Williams was on the Denver Broncos, yes, his skill is the same, but our expectations, they have to be adjusted. So for Jeudy, a player likely to lead this team from receiving from a volume perspective, especially with him Patrick projected to be out this week, while his floor will be much higher than that of Mike Williams, that will definitely definitely come at the cost of his ceiling. Jerry Jeudy, we have him ranked inside the top 40, so a solid flex option for you guys out there. But if you're facing one of your league's powerhouses, maybe you might want to go a different direction. The next matchup we have Chicago Bears versus the New Orleans Saints. Allen Robinson did unfortunately suffer a concussion. He's in concussion protocol. He's likely to miss this week, which would make Anthony Miller an intriguing start. While of course we all know A-Rob's the guy, I don't think many people gave him enough credit for what he's been able to do over his last 4 contests, facing some of the league's best defenses in 2020. Moving forward, he has one of the best 3-game slates that we could ever ask for from a wide receiver. The first game this week, as you know, against New Orleans. The hopes is of course that he's able to see the field. Unfortunately though, we are expecting to be without him. This makes Anthony Miller one of our highlighted flex players for this weekend. The Chicago Bears, they're really lacking dynamic playmakers that can perform consistently. Yes, Anthony Miller hasn't proven to be that type of player either, but we've seen it in previous seasons. His snaps have gone up each of the past 3 games, and if you are an owner of Anthony Miller, if he just so happens to produce, has a very solid game, this could bode very, very well for the trajectory he will be on for the remainder of the season. As for the New Orleans Saints, you have Michael Thomas, who suffered a setback. Manuel Sanders, he's also out with an injury, leaving Traquan Smith, Marquez Callaway, and a mix of lesser known receivers to make up most of that work in the receiving game. Obviously, we're not expecting the receiving game to be all that potent. It's part of why the projected total is as low as it is. And for me, I find it really difficult to trust any receiver on any given week that's been in this offense while Michael Thomas has been out, because it's sometimes an Emmanuel Sanders day, others it's a Traquan Smith day, and we saw last week when it turned out to be a Marquez Callaway day. Our highest ranked receiver by a pretty wide stretch is obviously Traquan Smith, the most experienced as a starter on this offense right now that's healthy. So Traquan Smith, our highest ranked Saints receiver this week, he's still outside the top 40, so we're not thrilled about it, but if we did have to pick one, he would certainly be it. The next game we have San Francisco versus Seattle. It's very unfortunate that we lost Debo. If Debo was in this game, I would be very, very high on him. He would likely be somewhere in the wide receiver 2 range, somebody I would consider with strong wide receiver 1 upside, but unfortunately for him, he's likely to miss. This will be increased opportunities for Brandon Ayuk. His exact role though doesn't 1-for-1 replicate what Debo does though. For that reason though, we can't completely skyrocket Brandon Ayuk in the rankings. We still have him ranked though as a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. Just know anytime you are playing a rookie, especially in a big situation, a divisional game against the current leader of the division, that added pressure, those defenses hyper-focusing you, the result, it may be less than ideal, but we still consider him a player with a relatively safe floor. On the other side of the ball though, for Seattle, we obviously have the 2 powerhouses in Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and while Metcalf is definitely the more safe option when it comes to a floor perspective, we saw exactly the type of ceiling Tyler Lockett can have in a positive matchup. The connection between Wilson, Metcalf, and Lockett, it's solid each way around. Both players, they can succeed. We're hoping to get more of that volume over to Lockett, not to the extent of course of last week, but just so he doesn't have such low games when the defense really do hyper focus him. Both DK, we both have ranked as high-end wide receiver 1s, so although this is a poor matchup against San Francisco, they will be coming into this without their weapons, leading to overall more opportunities, more time of possession for Seattle, which will trickle down to more volume, and volume for any of these receivers has translated to a massive amount of fantasy points. The next game we have is the Dallas Cowboys versus the Philadelphia Eagles, and both of these wide receiving cores, they have a lot of moving parts. I'm going to start with Philadelphia. It seems they're really scraping up the practice squad just to fill out enough players to make it on the field. Their leading receiver, Travis Fulgham, heading into this game, he's likely going to remain in that role. Jalen Reagor, still on IR. Alshon Jeffrey, despite coming off of IR, just continues to be be held out each and every week. Deshaun Jackson now returned to IR, which is likely to leave Greg Ward, Fulgham himself, as the clear target leaders for this offense, at least at the wide receiver position. That should be extra valuable this week against a very poor Dallas Cowboys defense that's been giving it up all year. So some of these players, if they are actually getting that volume we project, it gives each of these Eagles receivers a surprisingly massive amount of upside. On the other side of the ball, we'll start with Michael Gallup, who seems to be the odd man out lately. At first, it was looking a bit like he could be the go-to guy, but over the past couple weeks, the connection, the targets, the volume, everything has been decreasing. I've started to see Michael Gallup fall into the waiver wires. While I believe that is a bit premature, there's no way we could ever recommend you starting him in your lineup, and we've also significantly decreased the ranking of both Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. Each player is about 10 spots lower than we typically would have had them ranked with Dak Prescott, possibly even more than that. So Amari Cooper, we have him as a back-end wide receiver too. CeeDee Lamb comes with a bit more volatility, but he's in that wide receiver 3 range, and no other Dallas receiver we're starting outside of those players. The final matchup, the Monday night matchup, we have Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the New York Giants. Yes, we could say that playing from a deficit would help the potential volume for the New York Giants, but so far this season, they've been playing from behind in nearly every game, but really haven't been able to do anything with that volume. In fact, now that Sterling Shepard is back, I feel it clouds up the target market share for the other receivers, mainly Darius Slayton. So in turn, all of them have to be dropped, and this is also a pretty bad matchup. Darius Slayton will still be the highest ranked Giants receiver this week, but he's hardly cracking the top 30, a far cry away from where he's been. And Sterling Shepard, yes, coming off of a good game, he will be in that flex conversation, but not much higher than that, meaning Golden Tate, not really a player we're considering starting. As for the Buccaneers, the newest update is that Chris Godwin is actually injured, which is moving more towards Mike Evans being the focal point of this offense. In those games where that was the case earlier in the season, Mike Evans typically excelled. This will be enough to give him a ranking inside the top 10 this week at the wide receiver position, a ranking that's not only just, but comes with plenty of upside. And Scotty Miller, the Chris Godwin replacement who disappears from time to time, if you need to take a shot on a player or you're desperate, we do have him ranked just outside the top 40, which means some teams out there could be in a situation where they're going to put him in the flex. But guys, that's gonna do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.